Hello. Welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. Welcome, Brady.
Hey. Thinking about how excited I was.
Yeah, so welcome back. We last had you on in September, which was a lot of fun.
Birthday again, by the way.
What's that?
Happy birthday again, by the way.
There you go. There you go. That was fun. Thanks for setting that up. Yeah, okay. So we are going to be talking about building .NET HTTP APIs. And to introduce ourselves, I'm John Galloway. I'm a PM on the .NET community team. And Brady, you are?
I am Brady Gaster. I am a PM on the product team, and I do a lot of stuff with WebAPI, SignalR, my favorite thing other than John, and Azure. And your volume is going like this a little bit, so I don't know.
How about now?
Better. Thank you.
Okay. I'll keep on the mic.
No worries. I'll do the same thing.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Well, we've got we're worried we were going to be super rushed, and we found out your meeting right after this got canceled, which is so great.
It's bad. Yeah.
But we do have a hard stop at 11:30, I was told. So we have to keep it a little bit in control.
Yep.
Awesome.
Keep the boss happy.
Yep, exactly. I'm going to start right in on the community links. I'm sharing them in the chat. And here we go. So as always, these are they're included in the chat. They're going to be, I'll chat them again at the end. They will be in the description, and they will be painted in graffiti near your house. So here's the first one. This is coming up on Friday. This is our first ever of the series. We're doing a Let's Learn .NET. So this is cool. This is Jamie Singleton and Cecil Phillip. Both awesome people, and they're going to be doing, this is a beginner-friendly series. So, I mean, of course, you'll learn some cool stuff from them if you want to be there, but think about recommending this to students, newer people on your team, people who are still kind of learning .NET, maybe people who are programmers but don't know .NET yet, etc. So this is really cool. They are going to be doing walking through fundamentals of APIs, like understanding RESTful APIs, and then doing kind of a basic 35-minute, building an application using ASP.NET Core. So one really cool thing about this too is they're building these using the Microsoft Learn tutorials. So, which means if you're going through and you get lost or whatever, you can go back and you can redo them in the tutorials and stuff. So I'm super excited about this. Please share this out with your friends and all that stuff. Here's another thing coming up. This is on Thursday. This is part of the .NET Conf series, and this is focus on Windows. So the idea here is that they are going to be talking about how you can use .NET 5 and look forward to .NET 6 for building desktop applications. So, really cool stuff, how you can kind of light up your existing applications, how you can look forward to building applications with .NET 6 and the full agenda. There's some really cool stuff on here, including some stuff like, there's all the upgrading, there's, using different services, connected services and stuff. Click Once, which is really cool. Click Once actually awesome now. And then some stuff towards the end, looking towards the future with .NET 6. So good stuff. I got to talk fast. I've got a lot of links.
That's cool. I think I saw Jimmy Engstrom's name on there. I love his presentations.
So this, I believe, is not Jimmy Engstrom. It is his fabulous wife, Jessica Engstrom.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay, they are both super funny. They're the best. Yeah. So yeah, Jessica is going to be talking about what is she talking about? Something cool. She's going to be doing practical tips to improve user experience.
Nice.
So yeah, good stuff.
I just like how you never know what Avenger they're going to show up as. It's always cool.
Yes, exactly. Okay, this came out last week. Is .NET 6 already starting to roll out? First preview. So this is looking at overall what's the major work planned, and then also what's new in preview 1. So, stuff like hot reload, micro APIs, we've kind of hinted at some of this stuff with guests that have been on the show recently. They'll say, here's some stuff we're thinking about. And here's where it's kind of starting to kind of pull the plans together.
Mm-hmm.
So some neat stuff there. Updated single page application support, of course, Blazor, HTTP 3. And all this stuff is trackable in this themes of .NET site. So that's pretty cool.
That's cool.
And then looking at just some of the stuff coming in preview 1. So iAsync disposable, dynamic component. I'll talk about that in a second. .NET Watch now does .NET Watch run by default, which is something I've always wanted. So that's cool. One thing that's neat here, I think this is, hopefully we'll dig into this more with the next Blazor stand-up in March. But this dynamic component thing, because the idea here is you can call dynamic component and you can pass a type to it as a parameter, so you can bind to it. So I can picture this having multiple different component types depending on, am I binding to a product or a order or whatever, and I could pass that in. Or I could have maybe I'm listing different types of people and I could have different bindings depending on that. So you can pass in both the type and an array of parameters. Mm-hmm. So pretty slick. Also, I've kind of try and group things to keep saying here. Deploying Blazor to AWS Amplify. What I mostly want to call out here is Niels has been doing this series on deploying static Blazor applications to a lot of different hosts. So he's done to Azure static web apps, to GitHub pages, to Firebase, Netlify, and then this is digging into AWS Amplify. So the cool thing here is Blazor being static, you can deploy it pretty much anywhere. There are some things you need to do to wire things up, to make sure that the routing works and that sort of stuff. So he does walk through doing that. But I mostly just want to give a lot of props to building this resource of all the different ways. If you want to deploy Azure static apps, check out Niels's site because he does these great walkthroughs on that. Ed, talking about Blazor layout components. And the cool thing that he does here is contextualize, for people that are moving over from or are considering building Blazor applications and are more used to XAML-based applications, there can be a little bit of a mental jump you've got to make from XAML layout to CSS layout. Mm-hmm. And it can be scary. And fortunately, CSS has evolved over time to kind of pick up some of the smarts and things that people do like about XAML. So for instance, CSS Grid, and then there's also Flexbox. And so he talks about kind of comparing, hey, if you understand XAML, here's how you can understand CSS Grid.
Oh, that's cool.
And then, and CSS Flexbox as well. So, I used to live in the XAML world a while ago. I'm kind of rusty on it. I'm kind of more comfortable with the CSS, but I do like this kind of being able to kind of map back and forth between those. So this is something I'm cool.
That's really, really cool. And I never think of you as a XAML person. You're like a web person.
So it's funny. I'm 90% web person, but I did spend some time back when Silverlight was early on doing a bunch of Silverlight, and I lived Silverlight for a few years. And then I actually did a little bit of WPF too. But there are very different ways of kind of approaching layout to me.
That's cool. So is essentially, I'm not familiar with this. Is this because I am a web person, specifically a web API person? Is this specifically I can use CSS to style my XAML and WPF stuff? Or
no. Stuff? So what he's saying is, you can, if you're building things when you're building things in Blazor, you're going to be building more component based.
Right.
And you're going to need to think about component-based layout. And when you're doing that, grids and those sorts of things are useful. And Bootstrap will get you so far, but Bootstrap can be frustrating, right? If you really want to do kind of more, if you want the control that XAML gives you in layout, Bootstrap is probably going to frustrate you. And so so what he's doing here is mapping over to the concepts in CSS Grid and Flexbox.
That makes sense. That's cool. So, that's pretty okay. That makes more sense.
Yep. Yeah. It's useful. So So Ben's just always doing crazy stuff. He went in, and my understanding of this from how I read the pull requests and stuff is this is a tweak for front-end performance. And this is for the SignalR JavaScript libraries. And what he's done is tweaked the Webpack stuff. Okay. And Webpack is complicated to set up and do correctly. And how you manage, he's Ben, right? So, so I mean, he just went in and did all this stuff and shrunk stuff way down, and like shrinking things, like cutting them to tiny percentages of what they used to be. So cool. Yeah, it's just really neat work there. So Ben made that faster, and we didn't even think that could be faster. Yeah,
or more performant.
Exactly. It's a smaller download based on optimizing stuff. For instance, a lot of the stuff with Webpack is set up based on ES5, and there's a lot of stuff now that everyone is like, where SignalR doesn't support IE10 anymore, I believe, and so there's no reason to support ES5. And there's some other things about like if you map over the JavaScript levels of what is in supported browsers, you can tweak the what's in your Webpack and what's in your JavaScript specifically. So, and then stuff on here from the team, like, you know, reading and like saying, yeah, like basically thumbs up and stuff. So
nice.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that's painful about not being able to get a triage every time we have it. I miss out on some of these details. That's cool. I like that. That's great.
Yeah.
Always Brennan yell at me later.
Yeah, exactly. Great to see Ben being Ben. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, that's great, Ben.
So now I've got a bunch of kind of releases to call out to. Congrats to a lot of people. So Matt and the whole core WCF team have been working really hard. And this is something where I was involved with early on, back when I worked with .NET Foundation. The WCF was contributed to .NET Foundation as a core WCF project, and as an open source project. Matt is a Microsoft employee, and Microsoft pays for his time to work on core WCF. But there's also a lot of other people, including, he calls out in here, the AWS team. So Amazon AWS has been contributing to WCF. So this post is, this is there's a lot of text here, but if you're into WCF, and I talk to a lot of developers and they're like, I'm stuck on framework because I need WCF, or there are people that have made very heavy investments in WCF. So it's really cool to see this moving forward, and the amount of care that they put into building a solid product, something that's evolvable and, that people can really rely on. So like he said here, there were some early things in the design that were focused on building something that was very performant for Windows only. And in building something that runs on multiple platforms, they needed to make some architectural changes. Now they rely on async await tasks, and it's supportable and maintainable, and it's the trade-off in performance balance is kind of negligible at this point. But a lot of work to do this. So congrats to Matt and the whole team.
Congratulations on that. And you said something that's kind of important to me. We're talking about APIs today. If you're out there and you're building, your applications for Azure, and you're using, WCF and ASP.NET Framework, and you're challenged, or you want to move to core, or you're having any issues, don't hesitate to reach out. That's one of my jobs, one of my many jobs. And I'm currently trying to find customers who want to move and who are using WCF, having difficulty with that. So my door's open. Please send people my way if you have any folks like that.
Cool. All right. Let me see. Next, cool little another release announcement. This is the Blazor REPL team. So in this release, they reached a big milestone. You can install NuGet packages, configure custom services, and reference external static assets. So it's really cool to see these REPL things kind of grow up into something you can actually build something with. So here's an example, where they're doing that. You can they've got multiple different files here. We're building and hosting a mini application. So here's our NuGet package list, and you can, go in and, restore your packages and all this amazing stuff. So, I mean, this is really cool. Congrats to the team.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool.
Isn't it? I mean, it's like, so you've got like an IDE here, and you're building and running an application in the browser, and it's just like, so, and it's neat that it's leveraging, like, this is running client side, right? This is WebAssembly, and so anyways, it's cool to see, like, in the past, people building these kind of REPL things, and even including now, a lot of these like REPL based products, they've got to do so much on the server, and they've got to be worried about people, being malicious and mining Bitcoins and all this stuff. And it's cool with this. It's like we can push some of that down to the JavaScript sandbox in the browser.
That's really, really neat. It kind of makes me lament all the things that I complained about from the point I got up this morning. I'm not solving any big problems. This is really cool. This is a really cool project.
Blow Brady's
mind.
Yeah, and we'll add that to do, and then we'll check it off, because I think they did it. Yeah,
that's really groovy. I love that.
Cool. All right, the YARP team, they hit Preview 9, so this is 1.0 Preview 9. Some stuff here, support for .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5. So I think those are some of the main things. So congrats to the team. We've had them on in the past if you're interested. So this is a reverse proxy that you can code for in .NET. So you can, write like rich configuration rules. You can do routing and stuff in .NET code, and a lot of other good stuff too. You can also have kind of combined configuration. So instead of having some config and like YAML and some, like system way over here, and then you've got your .NET application over here, you can actually have .NET code all kind of, getting that reuse. So congrats to that team. All right, more congrats all around. Dapper 1.0 went out last week. So this is cool. We just have recently had Dapper folks on the show. So that's something you can look, I think, just 1 or 2 shows back. Yeah. But
I watched that show the other day. It was great.
Yep. Yeah. Good stuff. And then along with Dapper, if you're getting started, so the team, my teammate Nish worked with this. This is Dapper for .NET Developers. So this is a free ebook that you can read. You can view it on the web. You can download the PDF. You can do both things, I guess, if you want. So anyhow, that's exciting. So this is a full book that'll teach you, like, not just a little bit. This is a full on walkthrough, tons of code and everything. So
that's cool.
Excellent stuff. Okay, getting toward the end. This is a neat, just little tip. Cecil tweeted out. This is something that's been since .NET Core 3. Hi, Niels. Welcome to the stream. I just called you out earlier in the show and showed off your post, and I'm sorry you missed it. So this is neat. This is a in an endpoint. You can say you can do a Git Debug View on an iConfiguration root, and one neat reason that this is cool, and Scott calls this out, Scott Addy on the docs team, is he says this is extremely useful for answering questions like, is this value going to come from app settings or secret JSON, et cetera? And configuration in .NET Core, ASP.NET Core specifically, is really configurable, and it's really nice how it kind of layers, and you can pull some stuff in from Key Vault or JSON or configuration providers and stuff. But it also can be confusing to debug what's going on and why is this value not getting read, or where did this value come from? So this is a neat little tip to be able to do that. And you can map it to a specific endpoint. You could secure it, or you could say only in debug mode or whatever. So
that's cool.
This is one, Brady. Honestly, this is one you tweeted about and said it was awesome, and so I believe you that it's awesome. This is Azure Functions OpenAPI Extension. And there's some walkthroughs. So what I figured is I would share a few links here, and then we'll just dig right into them. There's this OpenAPI extension, and then there's these 3 blog posts we want to talk about here. There's a blog series that we've been doing. This is, first of all, creating discoverable APIs, and all kinds of stuff, produces, consumes, and configuring your project to create, like rich open API services. And then going further from that, there's, if you're really investing in building good quality APIs and doing a lot of development with that, you're going to want tools for it. And so you talk about tons of different tools for doing that.
So many.
And including a lot of community tools, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, one that just went out this morning. I know that guy. And this is a post that we worked on together. And this is fun. This is Visual Studio Connected Services. And this is generating clients, HTTP clients, based on those OpenAPI specifications.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and that's all the links I've got. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll let you talk a bit. How's that?
That's great.
All right.
That's been such a fun series to work on. John and I have talked about this series since October, November, and we've really wanted to do it. So he decided we're just gonna put it on the calendar for February and we're gonna get it done. Mm-hmm. So it's been really fun. I've forgotten how exhausting blogging can be. So
it is. It's one of those things too where we ask for feedback from the team. And they give you good feedback, and you're like, okay, thanks for the feedback, but now I have to make those edits, and that's a pain. So
yeah. Everything. I always say software is never finished. Work is never done. So, those were fun. I think one of the most fun things I got to do with that. I forgot to share my screen with you, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that with you now.
Yep.
Was being able to talk to Mr. Steve Smith. Who works on some of the things we talked about in the article. He works on API endpoints. It's a project out there that is sort of inspired by the idea of not having controllers, but having all the stuff that we know and love from Web API and from MVC. He's got a pretty Steve Smith-like blog post, tongue-in-cheek blog post, where he talks about how controllers are dinosaurs and they're just like a holdover.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's a pretty interesting kind of conversation, but I ended up having a chance to meet with Steve because I was walking through not only the work on the blog series.
Can you click the hide thing down on the sharing?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll do that right now. Sorry, buddy.
Nope.
There we go. I'm still up there. Good. So if you want to take a look at this, if you look in the blog post that John put out earlier, the one for the HTTP tools, the open source stuff, you'll see that API endpoints is listed in there. And if I were to scroll down, I don't know if he's got any code. Here we go. You can see that it kind of hooks up to Swashbuckle and all the other ASP.NET Core middleware because it really is built on top of Web API. Steve just wanted to kind of take Web API and make it essentially modular. So if you've ever done anything with Nancy, he kind of wanted to kind of take that modular approach rather than having to build controllers for everything. And I thought it was pretty cool. And I met with Steve, and Steve was like, use it, talk about it, steal it, whatever you want to do. I just want to have an option. You know what I mean? I love when the community is super open like that. That's been great. And I mentioned Nancy, and it wouldn't be right if I didn't go ahead and show Carter as well here. Now Carter is, from what I've looked at, and admittedly have not gotten very deep with Carter, but from what I've looked at, rather than kind of what Steve did, which was to sort of build on top of the Web API stuff and build on top of MVC and make it a little bit easier and obfuscate the controllers away, the folks at Carter kind of felt like they kind of sat a little bit lower in the stack. Like they kind of sit on top of endpoint routing and whatever else. But I wanted to kind of show the Carter project for folks who are interested in that kind of endpoint centric approach. I think you'll see more of stuff in art and what we're doing in ASP.NET kind of percolate like this. We're looking at these projects and talking to folks who don't want to do the whole controllers thing and thinking of other approaches and whatnot. So you might see some things evolve in ASP.NET. I don't want to speak out of turn yet, but we're definitely looking at these projects and thinking about what we can do to kind of answer this sort of an approach. So that's been kind of fun to kind of look at those different projects and think about new ideas. I won't get into Power Apps yet. The only other thing I would want to call out, if I scroll down in this post, for those of you that are out there using Edge, sorry to make everybody dizzy. If I can get to the right place, here we go, Network Console. So I wanted to point out Network Console. It's actually a feature that's built into Edge, the Edge browser. And if I scroll back out just a little bit, you can see that if you look at my URL here, I'm not going to do this today. I'm not going to run Network Console today. But if you see my URL here, you'll see that I'm just at localhost 5000. It's like I've hit F5. And as you know from the .NET Conf keynote and the session I did there, With Web API projects in .NET 5, we've actually added Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core to the template. So you get OpenAPI on by default. So you get the Swagger UI page for free. You just hit F5 and you're off and running. So this is essentially the F5 experience. This over here is if I were to go into my developer tools, and it's kind of interesting. I think I can do it here. If I go to my developer tools, and then I think it's F1. Now you go into that. Okay. And that mode is where you would go over to like experiments, and then you scroll down and you'll see I've got it checked already. So you've got network console checked. So I just want to point that out. Really, again, what you do is you open up your dev tools, and then you do a F1. And F1, you go into experiments, and then you click on network console. And I think you have to restart your developer tools at that point. You may have to restart your browser. I don't know. But what it does is it kind of gives you a API testing kind of a experience directly inside of your browser. I know there's a lot of great products out there. There's Postman. There's a what is it called? REST client for VS Code that's like kind of built in. So there's a bunch of different tools out there, but I like that this kind of puts it directly into the browser. So if you're building a Jamstack application, or let's say you're building a Blazor WebAssembly application that uses REST APIs on the back end, you could actually load your page and look at an individual request that goes back to the server right here, and you can click it and basically do edit and resend. And now you've got an experience right in here where you can actually edit the properties or edit the request payload that you're going to send, or edit any of the headers or anything at all that you want to send over. You can actually tweak all that directly inside of your browser. So I just wanted to call that out. If you're using Edge, you probably already have it, didn't even know about it. And there's a couple of other things in there. I believe it can do an OpenAPI specification interrogation. I don't know the keystroke for that off the top of my head, but you know, if you take a look at Network Console and you want to learn a little bit more about it, reach out and I'll connect you with the team. So there's that.
I love having those built-in tools. You know, I like both options. I like to install like a favorite utility or something that I know where to get and stuff. But it's great having something that's just going to be in there by default, partly because if I'm helping someone else on or writing a blog post or whatever, I can say, I know everyone's got it, right? Yeah. So it's built in.
Exactly. It's pretty cool. I mean, that's a nice little feature of it. I've just had a great time with that. It's been pretty cool. I mean, when you get the Swagger UI page, you know, it's like, but that's kind of my favorite experience for testing APIs. But at the end of the day, it's great to have those tools directly inside of your browser. So, and I apologize to you in the audience. I can hear that my wonderful son is practicing his recorder. So if you hear,
I don't hear it
in the background. Okay, good. Yeah. he's a world-class recorder player. I can tell you that. But let me see if I can flip over to. You might want to take me off screen real quick. Let me log in.
All right, stand by.
Sorry about that.
All right, tell me when you're ready.
Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. Happened yesterday too. It's like I keep switching back and forth and it times out. So this is the solution that's in the sample download, which is currently on my GitHub. We can move it to the official one if you want to. But to kind of walk you through, at least I keep looking up there. That's going to make me dizzy.
So this is the sample we use in the blog post series, right?
Correct.
And I mean, so you're going to show like the stuff you built for this discoverable APIs. And sounds great.
Sure. So whenever you clone the repo, which I know is in the blog post link, so I won't put that up there. Is there any way to dynamically generate the? Yes.
Yes, there is. Foreshadowing.
Question. You'll love this. All right. So the question was, is there a way to dynamically generate an OpenAPI specification from code? And I say OpenAPI specification or description because I work with Daryl Miller and he says that. So I have to say it. So that's a great question. And what I would show you is if I were to do file new project and do web API right now, if you select .NET 5, you will get OpenAPI on by default using an open source package known as Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core. There's another one out there called NSwag. Swashbuckle just had like quite a bit of numbers, so we wanted to just use that one as the template. We've talked about getting NSwag and a whole bunch of other stuff like API versioning and all other kinds of things. Like I really want to get a bunch more packages in there, but that's a long road, so I have to keep talking about it. But essentially you get this in your project when you do file a new web API project, and you also get what needs to be wired up in your startup CS. Now I've got a little bit extra in here because I built this up to kind of show the demos. But this first line here, this add Swagger gen, and this is all in the ASP.NET core documentation. There's actually an article specific to Swashbuckle and another one specific to NSwag. So you can pick which one you want to use. But this is really where you dial in Swagger, and you basically tell it, you know, in this case, I'm doing some customization because I'm using API versioning. But this
can you blow up your font size just a little bit?
Oh yeah, sure. This essentially, where's the zoom? Where did zoom go?
It's in the right below the line numbers. It says 155% on the left side.
Oh, here we go.
Yep. So that's one way.
Do it like that. Is that better?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So SwaggerGen is really what will output your OpenAPI or Swagger, interchangeable, unless you ask Daryl. That'll basically turn that on. And then what we've done in the template is inside of this is development block, we've added this as well, the use Swagger UI. And again, there's a little more code there than you'll see in the template because I've done some customization. But the use Swagger and the add Swagger gen basically turn on the ability for your web API controller to be interrogated by Swashbuckle or NSwag at runtime that will then output that open API based on a special URL, which I'll show you here right now. What I'll do here is I'll just hit F5, and that's going to hit, I'm running this completely in Kestrel. You could use IS if you want. But what I'm going to do is just open up, I just hit F5 and we go directly to that Swagger UI page. And if I were to click on this link here, this is actually the Open API, which I'll have to zoom in on, for my web API controllers. This is absolutely generated at runtime dynamically using those open source packages. Now, if I were to go, I got to zoom back out again. It's always the way. But if I were to zoom out here, now you'll see I talked about API versioning a couple of times. That's a really important NuGet package in the art of web API development. We talk about that a little bit also in that open source tools and packages blog post. But one of the things that it'll do is it gives me the ability in my code to actually, on my controllers or on individual controller methods, I can use things like API version. And what that will do is basically say, I know that I have these versions of these controllers, or excuse me, of these API versions in this controller. And if I were to scroll down a little bit, again, sorry for making everybody dizzy, but if I were to scroll down, what you would see is right here, I've got an attribute called map to API version. That's because I added this method, I added this operation, rather, in OpenAPI speak, to my API in version 1.2. So theoretically, it shouldn't be there for previous versions. So if I scroll down here, you'll see there's that low inventory method. If I were to use this and go back to like 1.0 or 1.1, you'll see it's gone now. So that's an example of how API versioning and the stuff inside of Web API and the stuff in Swashbuckle all kind of snap together using the middleware and the services and the bedrock stuff that we've all implemented on the team. So now we did not write Swashbuckle and API versioning; those are contributed from third parties or open source devs. But we recommend you use them because they're fantastic. There's a lot of Azure service teams, for instance, that use some of these NuGet packages to do some of their work. If that's good enough for Azure, it's good enough for me. You can also see here that I've got this products page thing. If I were to go up here and select 1.0, you should see that that'll vanish because that was a method that I added between 1.0 and 1.1. And if I wanted to, I can actually go ahead if I wanted to test out my API, see if I have any data here. You can see that it goes ahead and it takes the version that I've selected and it pre-populates that parameter box right here with the 1.0. If I want to, I could go here and just hit try it out. It'll give me this execute button. And of course that's going to happen. rules. So yeah, demo rules. I don't know why it's not executing there. It executes in Azure. So, but I think maybe I don't have my connection string wired up locally, but that's the idea.
But that's really,
question, but that's how it works.
That's really handy. I spend a lot of time, when I'm starting building something from scratch, then you end up like curling or doing some REST client to do it. So it's like, that saves you time to have something that's, and it also shows you, like, if you're posting something, it shows you, here's the kind of request I expect to see.
Yep, exactly. It really, really does. And like I said, I just went to the docs page and I went over here to the TOC, to Web API apps. Right here that we've got the Swagger and OpenAPI stuff inside of the Web API apps. And if you look here, we've got an article on Swashbuckle and we have an article on NSwag and all the different stuff that you can do with that. So we do have great documentation across the board and like how to use these different packages here. But that's how you do that on the Web API side.
Okay.
Now, I know it's not as much ASP.NET, but you asked me about the function stuff. So what I'll do here is I'll just set this as the startup project. And we go through in pretty great detail in the blog post about things like using the produces consumes attributes. Those basically can specify I'm only going to accept or send you JSON. So if you want to control like kind of how your OpenAPI document gets like informs clients as to what kind of output you're going to give them, that's a really easy way to do it. We go through that in the blog post pretty extensively. The one other thing I want to call out is this here, and I don't have it turned on, so I'm going to do this and just turn this off. But I want to show you this API conventions here, because what that'll do, like we talk about in the blog post, is there's a lot of situations when you're writing like a web API controller where you might have a method such as create order. Let's just say create order. And create order, I might do something that I might try to throw you an order for which there's already an order ID. You know what I mean? We would get a conflict in that situation. But I might, it might work. In the case where it works, I would want to return a HTTP created response, because when you're doing a post, kind of the specification says post return creates, gets return okays. So in the case of this API, one of the things that OpenAPI will do is it'll say, not only can I tell you what sort of request and response this API was going to give you, but I can also tell you the potential HTTP response codes that it will respond with. So what the API conventions does, at least in the way that I'm using it right here, what that will do is it will automatically interrogate the different pieces of code, the different return types in any of your action methods. And it will infer in that OpenAPI, this method could return conflict, could return not found, could return okay. If you don't do that, it'll always say, I'm going to return 200. So in the case of a code generator, it might not know how to process the response.
Can you scroll back up to that reference with the assembly colon thing at the beginning is not super common. Do you want to talk about why that's required or what that means?
Totally. That's a great question. So what I could have done here is I could have taken this attribute. I could have taken this attribute and I could have just put it directly onto a particular controller like this. But what that means is it's only going to apply to that controller. Now, if I want to go through all 200 controllers in my project and do this, I can. But if what I really want to do is make sure that it's a global, like a convention, I can essentially use that same attribute at the assembly level. And what it says, that will do is it will go through the assembly and find all of the Web API controllers. And anytime I'm making a call, it'll just impact them. It will impact the way the OpenAPI is designed based on what the return codes are in those individual action methods. So it's great.
Okay.
It's an assembly level thing. It's like, oh, the whole assembly, all the controller types, like all the classes decorated as an API controller, all of the methods that return an action result, figure out what they return, and generate the OpenAPI to that extent. So okay,
a few questions and stuff coming in. So one was somebody asked, where the code was. And so I just shared the link from the blog post. So it's GitHub, Brady Gaster, and then Contoso. Online orders, good old Contoso. A few questions about like securing APIs, and that gets a little more difficult. And I think, I'm guessing, to jump to the end, this is something really more where like API management makes this simpler. Is that
API
or
management does make it simpler, but Swashbuckle and NSWAG both have support for OAuth. So you could, like, let's say if you're doing what I would do, because I always use AAD, Azure Active Directory, or Microsoft Identity. Can't remember what they call it. No offense, guys. But essentially, if I were to create like a client app and a service app, the service app would be applied to my web API. I'm regurgitating what Christos always tells me. The client app would be assigned to my web app, and then the two would, have a trust relationship. In that context, my client app is going to be communicating with my web API using OAuth. It'll be securing using OAuth. You can essentially go into your configuration for your Swashbuckle or your NSWAG, like YARP and Startup CS, and you can add code that that knows how to do the authorization against an OAuth source. You can tell I'm so great at identity. It's a great question though, because Christos pinged me recently and said he wants to have me on the 425 show to talk about identity with either Signal or Web API. So I was thinking about doing a JWT focused show that basically shows how to authenticate a web API and then use that same token to make Signal or outbound calls. So if people find interest in that, I could do it. Our mutual friend from Arizona, Joe G. He has a wonderful web API series on his Twitch show where he goes through a lot of details on web API auth. And he used the new stuff from Christos's team, Microsoft Web Identity or Identity Web. He used all that stuff in his project, and he gave them feedback. And they took a lot of that feedback.
Cool.
I would definitely look at Joe's show if you want to go deep on like web API, how to authenticate it, how to get your tokens and all that stuff. Joe really, he put himself out there and learned a lot. It was exciting to watch. So,
okay.
You put that in your show notes. I can get it for you.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good. Let me see some other questions coming in. It's great. Ask your questions in the chat. We're watching all. So we're actually, for people watching, we're on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook. We're on Periscope, going out on Twitter. We're all over the place. So ask your questions any of those places we watch them. So a question here on this global assembly type for versioning. Can you do that as well?
I don't believe that you can. And I'm sorry, Chris, and the other members of the API versioning team, if I am speaking out of turn. John, I'm going to get you a link on this real quick. Handsomeone's got a couple of great blog posts on API versioning. I think that's how me and the rest of the free world actually learned about it originally.
Yeah.
I just gave John a link in the chat, which I presume he'll share with everybody.
Yeah.
The ASP.NET API versioning stuff supports both ASP.NET Framework and ASP.NET Core and OData flavors. I don't know if you can do an assembly level version for API versioning, but if it can be done, their samples will show you how.
Okay.
So
cool. All right. Taking a bunch of quick questions here. I don't know about this one. This is asking, is there a way to do YAML based and generate code stubs and models and stuff?
Yes, there is. There totally is. Darn it, I'm not going to be able to find that link either. Okay, so let me tell you about it. There was a hackathon project that we put together in the summer of 2020 when things got interesting, and we just had to do work to keep our minds off of things. And some folks from the functions team, some folks from CA, some folks from API management, and myself. We got into this conversation about what I like to call design first APIs, like basically writing your OpenAPI spec by hand. There's some great VS Code extensions to do that as well. We'll talk about in the blog post, but essentially to build your OpenAPI spec or description file by hand, then to aim a code generator at it and to create essentially like a web API project from it or a functions project from it. We started
Wow.
thinking that would be really exciting. Like, just give me the boilerplate code and let me party on it. Now, if you were to go and look for the Swagger Editor project, which I believe is officially owned by a company called Smart Bear, if you were to look at the Swagger Editor can generate both client code for OpenAPI specs and server code for OpenAPI specs. And they have Scala, they have Node, they have the whole world. So you can basically go to the editor.swagger.io, I think is what it is, and you can, party all over it and tinker with it. But I know that what we did inside of the VS Code extension for both, I think it was both Azure API Management and Azure Functions, was we put an interesting experimental thing into it. We called it Project Stencil. Varad.
Oh yeah.
He did this. It was really exciting. It was called Project Stencil, and it was one of those like groundswell projects that like people all over the company thought was really thought needed to happen. So we just did a hackathon project, made it work, and shipped it. And it was really cool. It's in VS Code extensions for function and APIM. What you can do is you can go to the API management portal. You can design an API using their Portal Blade and stuff, make your operations and everything. And then you can go into the VS Code extension. You can right click that API and say, generate an Azure function project for me. And the next question it asks you says, what language do you want? So you can pick .NET, Node, or TypeScript, .NET, TypeScript, Java, or Python. There are opportunities with all four of those generators. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Your mileage may vary. It is an experimental project, but if you like that idea, please reach out, because we need all the ammunition we can get. We really believe that there's something to be said for design first. And we want to do a little bit more experiments with that. So right now it's kind of isolated to building Azure functions. We don't have it to build web APIs, but everywhere is walking distance if we have the time. We could use Autorest, build a couple of new template generators. We could write something else. We could talk to our friend Daryl, see what he's got up his sleeve. There's options. But I love that you're thinking that way. Design first is really, in my opinion, the next step. So
cool. Okay. So I interrupted you with a lot of questions, but I think what you've shown so far is we had a bunch, you've been showing us controllers, and you've been showing how we can put, you can put attributes on them, and you can set up versioning and stuff, and you're generating your Swagger description based on your controllers.
Exactly.
Now, there was some stuff that you did in your blog post where you go in and you configure stuff in your project file. You set some project file stuff.
Yeah, let me show you what I was doing there. So, and I've taken some of that out, which is not good blogger behavior, I know. I had some comments from some folks. People do not like compiler switches. Let's put it that way.
All right.
So what I had essentially done is, inside of the blog, what you'll see is I first had a series of these, which I kind of had this going two ways. And it's going to probably air out for now. This is really what comes in the templates. So this is, and there's nothing wrong with that. Fine. But what will happen if I run this OpenAPI? I can show you real quick. So let me comment this one out. Let me comment this one out. And let me do it like this. I'm just going to give you a quick little rundown of what this does. So I don't have those in here anymore. So I'll go ahead and let me set this as my startup project, and I'll run this. And what you'll see on the Swagger UI page will probably be enough information for you to know why this next part matters. So on the Swagger UI page, what you'll see is that I've got check inventory, ship order, update product inventory, create. See these pretty names? Those pretty names will literally be used by most code generators to generate code, or as we'll see later when we talk about Power Apps, to generate kind of like consumption stuff. Okay. And when you don't provide what's called an operation ID in OpenAPI, code generators and consumers have to guess. All right.
It looks like it guessed poorly.
It looks like it guessed poorly. So here's what Right. So here's what happens in the generated code. So here I've got orders, and here I've got orders by ID. All right. So if I were to look in the generated code for that, and I've got the code in console client and program CS. So what I'll do is I'll scroll down until we get to this part, and you'll see it's commented out because it's the compiler switch is in there. But you'll see here I've got products and I've got products too. That's because both of those operations, their name in JSON speak is product or products. So the code generator is like, you didn't really tell me what to do here. I'm going to have to guess. So I'm just going to start putting 2s and 3s at the end.
1, 2, right. Hey, that's better than SharePoint. Drop a GUID on it. But,
right, exactly. Your words, not mine. So if I scroll up, I'm doing it over there again. If I scroll up in here, what you'll see when I get up here is, here we've got get products, and here we've got get product. And then right here, we've got update product. And these are pretty names. See what I'm saying? And I was talking about you earlier, Christos. I'm talking about identity. You're a little late. So he always shows up and he goes, wait, you're doing that wrong. So this is really what you get when you turn on operation IDs. So that's why I had those compiler switches in there, is I wanted folks to be able to see it before and after. But last night when I was working on the code, I was like, well, I'm going to do this show. I'm just going to take it all out.
Okay.
So I apologize for that. But the other thing that I had wrapped in those was the produces consumes. I'm not going to turn that off, but basically what you would get there is you're going to see text, JSON, and all the other content types, unless you, and then like if you don't know how to respond to them, when you get a call, you're going to break, or you'll get a 404. You know what I mean? So I like to do this because I only like to use JSON. So there's that. Somebody asked a question about YAML. If you're doing like an OpenAPI thing, I do want to put this out there. Swashbuckle and NSWAG both, as well as the OpenAPI generating functions, the OpenAPI bindings for functions. They will all support giving you Swagger v2, OpenAPI v2, and OpenAPI v3 with Swagger or with JSON or YAML. So you do have that option. Like if you're a YAML person, you can ask for the YAML and you'll get the YAML instead of the JSON. So let me flip to this. So that kind of explains the operation ID, which we talked about in the code. And if I were to go to this function here, set as start a project. So with a function, you can, a lot of folks do functions as static classes and static methods. Some folks will, they'll use the ASP.NET middleware and the startup CS stuff. The normal hosting approach. But we didn't want to preclude folks in either category. We wanted to make sure that if you're using the hosting approach with DI or you're using statics, that it would still work. So essentially what we had to do was to kind of give you ways to dial it in. With functions, the best way to do that is really using attributes. So I've got a lot of namespaces, so my apologies here. And Justin's done a great job of documenting this. So there's a lot of different docs on these different attributes. Well, let me kind of walk through what they do first. So the first one, whenever you're writing a function, so I've got send low stock notification. You basically have to give the function a name. So I usually use name of here. That's something I've seen Jeff Holland do. So thank you for that tip. Yeah. So I actually borrow the name of to do my function name in the same way.
So and let's dig into that just a second. So the nice thing with name of, that's in C#, and what's cool with that is that's going to, instead of hard coding a string, anytime you see a string in code, like a little alarm should go off in your head. Like, is that good? Because you could misspell it, or if the string changes, you have. So what's cool here is it generates the string based on the actual C# name.
Exactly.
So now if I go and rename that class, it's going to either break, like I'll get a compiler error, or it's going to like prompt me to refactor or whatever. Yeah. So
it's a power change it there. And I totally borrow that same approach in my controllers. This is not a recommendation. I don't give advice, but I borrow that same kind of approach in my controllers because I do this explicitly. If you're out there and you do a lot of web API and you would like us to put this name property in the template, feel free to let me know.
Well, I was just going to ask about that. Like, how much of this can be conventional as well?
A lot.
Okay.
Like a whole bunch. Which reminds me, there's one of the things that we talked about that is linked. I didn't talk about it in the blog post, but I would really encourage you to scroll to the very bottom and look in the comments. John, have you ever heard of the boxed template series?
Yes. Yeah. It's been a little bit, but do you want to bring that up I
don't know if I have it. Let me see if I've got it here. I think it's in the comments of this post. Boxed. Here it is.
Yeah. You're right. It's been a little bit since I've shouted that out. That's a great project. And it's an opinionated approach. It's an opinionated template that sets up a lot of stuff. So some of what you're showing in the blog series is go here, turn this on, do this, add this attribute. And what this template tries to do is just say out of the box, it's going to be set up that way.
Correct. And we try really hard in the templates. They're really templates are hard to maintain. You know what I mean? So we try to make the template small on behalf of our devs. Yeah. We also try to make the template small on behalf of our community by default, because we've heard for years, don't make all these assumptions about what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how to use any of this stuff. The community tends to, as do I, tend to want to go learn every single concept you throw at somebody in a template. So for something like Box, you're going to be learning a lot. You know what I mean? The only beef I have with it, I tried it the other day. I tried Box the other day, and you can see I'm on a Mac. Nothing against PowerShell. I'm more of a Bash user. It's just a personal thing for me. So the Box templates, it looks like they require PowerShell. There's one thing I would ask for, it would not require PowerShell.
Okay, one nice thing though, with PowerShell being cross-platform and everything, and you can actually do .NET install PowerShell now.
Yep.
Or .NET upgrade, yeah. So
you totally can. And I installed PowerShell just to try the Box template. So there's that.
Nice.
On my Mac. So it did work. But that's kind of how we did it with controllers. Now in functions, there's no server. Wink, wink. So essentially, I don't really have a lot of the stuff that I would have, for other areas. So I would need to use these attributes. Attributes are rich throughout all the different functions SDKs. Anthony Chu wrote some of my favorite ones, the Azure Signal R bindings, which I've talked about before on the show. But in this case, what we're doing here is we're saying this attribute is basically establishing an operation. So you can see here, operation ID. One of the things Justin and I talked about, Justin, the dev working on this, we talked about this, and I said, you've got to make operation ID on by default, and I want it to be in everybody's face. So he put it right there in front. So I was really happy about that, because it's easy to forget, And if you read the OpenAPI spec, it's actually not required, but if you use it, it has to be independent for every operation in your entire API.
So that's something you talk about in the blog post, is those operation IDs need to be unique if you use them, right? So that's part of, I was trashing a bit earlier, it generated a stupid name, but it's got to make a unique name. So
it's got to, it's got to. And on Rico and the folks, Rico from NSWAG, and then the folks who work on the Autorest team, Autorest is very big on operation IDs. You can't blame them. They kind of you have to, you can only do so much, you know what I mean? And I talk about that in that first post. And some people in the comments actually called out, what was it? Discoverable APIs and well-described APIs aren't necessarily the same thing. If I had it to do over again, I probably would have called them well-described APIs instead of discoverable. But details. But in this case, I'm basically saying this is going to be an operation ID or an operation in my Swagger, in my OpenAPI. Here I'm basically this is this OpenAPI request body. You can see here that it's got body type is type of product array. I guess I put it in a different class, but if I were to go, I'll just leave this open. If I were to open up product, you can see here just a typical class. I I couldn't have made it a record because I'm in 3.1. But you can see here it's just a typical class. And all I'm doing is I'm saying this Azure function will take, I'm doing it over there. This Azure function will take a payload of type product array. And if you look in the function, you can see that I don't have that as a method parameter. All right. That's because the function is really, it's sort of making the assumption that I'm going to do something like, I'm going to look at my, here we go. Where I'm reading the request. At some point, I actually read the request coming in. Oh, I guess I took that code out. I add that code back. I stopped doing that. Oh, here it is right here. So you can see here that I'm essentially deserializing my request body into a array of products, and I'm just looking at the ones that have an inventory count of less than 5. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's kind of silly, but it's really just to kind of show that end to end. Now, if I were to run this, now this is great because what I end up doing is I just build my function, and I used, in this case, I'm using the minimal number of these attributes because I just wanted to like light it up as a OpenAPI decorated Azure function. And I wanted to specify what my payload was going to look like. And after that, I was done. You know what I mean? That's all I want to do. Everything else is automatic. Now, one of the things that you can do in this is I could wire up something like this. I actually created a class called card metadata. Or no, wait, that's not what I was looking at. That's the wrong class. Sorry, I'm jumping around a bit much here. Where did it go? Here's the wrong class. So this is a class that implements this interface, OpenAPI configuration options. Now, what we talked about was there's a few different ways that you can essentially configure the metadata for your OpenAPI inside of a function. One of those ways is you can use host.json. One of those ways, there was another file, I think it was openapi.json. We had like a myriad of different like ideas on this one. This is my favorite because like I can just read configuration from whatever I want. If I'm versioning, I could read it here. So I just went ahead and made a class and put it directly into my class. So it's not a big deal. And then this is something that is a holdover from version 4 to version 5 or version 0.4 to version 0.5. It was an issue I found the other day. I think Justin's actually already fixed this issue in his NuGet package and reshipped it. So we're going as fast as we can. But if you can kind of imagine the question from earlier, like, could I take an OpenAPI spec, and could I generate code from it that I would then fill in? Imagine if you wrote your OpenAPI spec and then you got code that looked like this, and then basically inside of the method, it said implement here.
Okay.
See what I'm saying? So it would generate that entire shell and then let you put the important stuff where it needed to go.
So, and a focus there is to like, I want to describe a service and then I just want to like focus on my business logic, and I don't want to spend all the time like wiring stuff together and handling timeouts and all that kind of like random stuff, right?
Right. Like one example of why that would save you time is we talked to a couple of customers who are building APIs recently to kind of do some of this work. And one of the things that we asked them, we said, tell us about your process. Like what do you do? Like, how do you design your API? And they'd say, well, we meet with the business analyst. We have probably like 3 or 4 whiteboarding sessions. We'll come up with like a mock UI. Then we'll kind of figure out from that mock UI what the API should look like, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, so how many weeks of meetings do you have before you write any code? They're like, oh, like a month. You know what I mean? So what if a business analyst could go and design the API that their app needs and just generate the shell code and hand it off to a dev? I'm not saying all the code. I'm not saying do the dev's work. I'm saying it's like file a new project. File a new project is driven by your OpenAPI spec versus whatever's inside of Visual Studio. That's really all we're saying.
Cool. Yep. Okay. So like to look at this in context so far. So we've talked mostly, we've looked at building the APIs, how you can configure them, attributes you can put on them so that you're building like good quality Swagger that's versionable, and all that kind of stuff. You've shown us some stuff with looking at Azure Functions and like the Azure Function integration. A few things I wanted to make sure we got time to cover too is the some of the stuff with connected services, and then if you have time to look a little bit at like the API management integration and the low code stuff.
Totally do that. So this really is just like the Azure function. When I hit F5 on my function, it knows what URLs I'm going to do. See here, I didn't have to tell it to render Swagger UI. It just does, like the bindings do that for me. And then also they've got a render OpenAPI document and a render Swagger document. So you can use either one of those flavors. And if you're doing the OpenAPI, you've got JSON or YAML. So you've got it all.
Nice.
So this is great for serverless dev that want to try out, functions in OpenAPI. So you want to talk about connected services?
Yeah. Yep. And this is something I think a lot of people don't know is included.
Yeah.
So it's a neat thing.
It's kind of cool. So essentially, we used to have this thing in the product. I don't know if it's even in here anymore. I want to show you this. If you've ever used this feature, looks like it's gone. So that's good. There used to be a feature which you looked in add here, and it would basically be add.
Was it service reference sort of thing?
It's like service reference, but it used to be add REST API client.
Yeah. Okay.
Where that feature is kind of old and kind of gone. Really where it lives now is in connected service. So what I did in this project here was I right click this project and I literally go to add, and then I say connected service. And what you'll see in here is that we've got service dependencies, and that's where you do things like Cosmos DB or SQL Server or those kinds of things. But we also have this segment right here called service references, where I can say OpenAPI or gRPC. So what I can do right now is I could click plus, and I'll show you the gRPC one first, even though we're not going to go into too much detail on it. I'm sorry, sir. Yeah. Is if I click next here, now I can actually generate a server or a client project from a proto file. So, whereas REST APIs kind of use OpenAPI to describe themselves, gRPC services use proto. So I could write a proto file, and then I could actually aim this proto file at it, and I could generate a gRPC app client, or I could generate a gRPC server stub, like I talked about earlier, that you can then like put your important code into, and we've already done all the wire up so that it will emit gRPC for you. I won't do gRPC today because we're talking about OpenAPI and REST APIs. So I would go here and I would select OpenAPI, and then you can do two things. You can provide a path to a file, or you can provide a URL path, or I could select an Azure asset. We're eventually going to add Azure API management to this button. So you'd be able to look at your Azure APIs inside of API management.
Let me just, you'd mentioned gRPC. Let's just cross that off the list.
Okay.
Can you describe, how do I choose gRPC or OpenAPI? What's kind of the difference?
That's a great question. This is my answer. Okay. So gRPC is what you would want to use in kind of the same way. This is my answer. If you ask Rob, he might give you a different answer, or James. gRPC to me feels like you would use it in the same places that you would use WCF. So if you're inside of an enterprise, or you're inside of a cluster, it's very popular inside of Kubernetes clusters. If I were to want to communicate inside of my enterprise or inside of my cluster, or I know that all my clients support gRPC, that's when I would want to use it. The example that I gave yesterday when Mads asked me this question was, if I have a small embedded device, smaller than a Raspberry Pi, it can't handle, usually it couldn't handle something like gRPC because it's just low memory, low network support, et cetera, et cetera. But it can handle HTTP GET and HTTP POST. So what I tend to advise people to do, even though I don't give advice, is if you have a Kubernetes cluster or an AKS cluster, you can put all of your microservices inside of that cluster. You can create an ingress on the front of it. Everything inside of that cluster can communicate using gRPC, WCF, whatever you want. The front door of it would be normal HTTP. So that would be where your REST API is. Your REST API coming from a phone, coming from a small client, coming from a soil temperature humidity checker. That's where you'd want to do REST APIs, because they're more lightweight. So.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, and there's sort of an architectural feel difference. gRPC is remote procedure call, it's RPC, right? And this is more service oriented, and it's more so.
Cool. Yeah, that was an interesting conversation with Ryan the other day on Dapper and
Yeah.
REST APIs. It really made me think. I had a conversation with him right after that show, actually. So, because I always talk about REST APIs, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Can I not use Dapper?" He goes, "No, that's not what I meant." That was a great conversation. So, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to do this here. I just wanted to show you how to get to it. You know, if you're inside of a project, you would essentially right-click. You would go to Add Connected Service.
Mhm.
And then you click on this you're here, and then when you click on the Open API, and then you would party on it. Now,
what's cool here is you're adding. This isn't a one-time thing. Like it's actually adding that reference, so you can go if you update the service, you can refresh it later, right? Which is cool.
Correct. So I'll show you something that I do when I build these projects that one day I promise we'll have directly inside of Visual Studio. Mads was breaking my heart the other day because he was like, "Don't you remember when I could add a ASMX project to my solution, and then I could add a desktop app, and then I could just hit F5 and they both ran and everything works." And I was like, yeah. Crawl, walk, run, bro. Come on. So here's how you can do this yourself. So what I did when I did this Open API, connected service experience thing, if I double click my project, essentially all you get in there is this. So that's this node. And if I were to scroll over here, you'll see that. Let me kind of give us some room to breathe. You can essentially see here that the first thing is this file. It wants to include this OpenAPI JSON file that is built from this project right here, the API project. So if you think about the workflow, the API builds. During the build, and I'm actually using the Swashbuckle CLI in here. We actually use that inside of API and publishing. And you could do this using NSWAG too, because NSWAG can actually output your OpenAPI file on build. But I did this by hand, and this is in the sample. One day we'll have some sort of a gesture where, once this happens, we wire this up for you and, we're done here. We're not there yet. A lot of that is actually customer feedback. Some customers were concerned about that. So, we just have to get it right. And there's a lot of wrongs. So what I've done here is whenever I do a build, like anytime I build my API project, the thing that will happen after build is that Swashbuckle will generate my OpenAPI file for me from my assembly after I build my project. So I build my API DLL, then I build the JSON file that is associated with that DLL that basically describes it using OpenAPI. Then this project builds, the client project builds. So it builds, it pulls that JSON file in, then it does a compilation. And what's interesting is if I were to view all files here, is this the right button? No, where's the right button? Where's view all files, John?
Oh, it's up at the top, and it's like 2 to the left of the wrench. Yep.
There we go. So if I were to expand this, I think it's an object.
So there's a question: is the Swagger generation only for .NET 5? And it's not, right?
No, it's not. It's all the way back to framework. You can do Swashbuckle goes back to ASP.NET Framework. All versions. I've been using it since you and I worked together, which is a long time ago. So if I were to see here, this file right here, contoso online orders.api client.cs, if I were to open that up, this code is generated by a tool. And if you were to scroll down, you'll see thousands and thousands of lines of code that you would have written yourself. It's instantiate an HTTP client properly. Wink, wink. Make the request, get the response back. This is important. Check the HTTP response code to make sure it's one that I thought I was going to get, like conflict. Okay, not found. If it's what I expect to get, if it's one of the ones I expect to get, look at the payload, deserialize the payload into an object, pass that object back to the caller. You've written that code 100,000 times, and we know nobody wants to write it again for 1,200 lines.
So we were talking about this when we were like working on the blog post, and it's like, you don't want to have to look at that code, but that doesn't mean it's not good code. It's good quality tested code. It's code that the Microsoft API devs argue about and make sure it's perfect and handling all the edge cases and stuff. So it's good quality API code. It's just code you don't want to have to write and test and fix and maintain and stuff.
That's exactly right. And we've had many meetings with all the folks who work on these projects, and like we give them feedback just like they give us feedback. So
I want to show one more thing on that. Can you go back to that client?
Oh yeah, you would do that too.
I would. Yeah, sorry. So the client that it generates is a partial class. So if you did want to extend it, because it's code generation, you don't want to ever modify generated code. But you can extend that partial class. So say, for instance, you wanted a utility method, or you wanted something that was like, get and check customer, blah, blah, blah. And it does like compile several things together or adds custom validation or whatever. You do that in a partial class.
Yep. Exactly. And since it uses the HTTP client underneath, you can use like the delegating handlers and all that stuff.
So that's something I had asked you about before the call. I was like, hey, is this something we can talk about? So that is something with HTTP client has support for things like poly, for retry, and all kinds of other stuff. And so you can, because you're passing that into this generated client, you can configure all those policies. You can use poly. You can use all those sorts of other things.
You sure can. It's all in there. I mean, it's literally the same code you would have to write. You just don't like writing it.
Yeah.
It's like doing a forms over data app or something like that. I know we don't have much time, and I know you want me to show this. I'm going to do one more thing, and that is I want to set this as my startup project. And Damian, Brady, I'm sorry, I'm going to right-click publish here. But what I'll do is I just want to show you this part of the experience. So what I've done is, since I've got that swashbuckle action in there, and I'll just do a new publish profile here. And I would select Azure, and I would do app service. And then I would pick my app, and I'm not actually going to deploy this. So there's my web app. But look here, you see how I've got this new node here called API management. Okay. The reason that's there is the project system can see, hey, Alex, nice to see you. That can actually see that I am emitting OpenAPI because I've got this reference to swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. And what it does is right inside of here, it shows me my API management instances so that I can pick one, and I would pick store APIs, and I would do finish, and it would just publish my app to app service. As soon as it finishes publishing the app, it's going to use that. We do exactly, I actually took the code out of the repo. We do exactly the same thing. We literally use swashbuckle CLI just during that build time step to produce that JSON file, because you might not want it running on your production site. Then we ship that up to the API managed. Watch me here. We ship that file up to the Azure API management APIs so that we can create a new API in your management API service instance. How's that? So
nicely said.
So we do all that stuff, and what that ends up giving you, if I have a browser tab open over here, is if I were to go to Azure, you can see right here. Now, remember I talked to you about operation IDs? This is my store API that I ingested directly into API management. And look at here, all of these pretty names. John could come along and inherit my APIM instance, and he would know exactly what everything does here.
Okay, let me try it and see if I got the sales pitch correctly from you last time I talked to you about API management. Because part of me thinks like, this is just something I could host with Kestrel. I could host it and whatever. Like, why do I need to put it up here in API management? Some cool things with this. Number one is you can handle like all the versioning. You can handle, you can even handle like policies. And I think you can have different like authentication, and you can have, like, I could say you have to have a paid subscription to get access to these certain things and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So let's say you are somebody like Stripe, and you're like, your business is your API. You know what I mean? You can go over here inside of Azure API management, and you could set up, if I can find it, where's products? If I can actually find products in here somewhere, I can actually have different products, and I'm not having any luck finding products. You can actually go in here and you can set up different products and different, there we go, different subscription levels and whatever else. So you can see here that I've got a starter and I've got an unlimited. I might have something that was like admin only, and it's the only, set of customers that can actually access those admin APIs. But it does a lot of other things too. Like you talked about security. I could actually go into this API. This is something that Christos, who pinged us earlier, is looking into from the identity team in partnership with the Azure API management team. is a way to use API management to authenticate the APIs versus having all the code to authenticate your APIs. So API management would become your auth layer versus you having to know all the different SDKs and everything. I'm not proposing that is a, one solution fits all, but it is a solution, and it's a solution that a lot of people want to do, investigate. One other thing you can do, and I'll talk about this in the blog post that's going to come out later this week, but if I were to go into this resource group here, now you also saw in my API management instance, if I were to go, that's not it. In my Azure API management instance, you also saw how I've deployed that function out. So you see that I've got the store APIs, and I've also got the notification API, which would essentially send a adaptive card to a Teams channel. If I were to go in here, now you'll see that I've got this logic app. Now, if I go into that logic app and I go to the edit view, and it's failing for me at the moment, I've done something awry, but you can see that I can set up a recurrence, and this is my Azure APIM instance. I can actually write a logic app that will call the individual APIs, such as initialize, like it will actually, in this case, I'm calling my get low inventory products. I'm creating a variable that's equal to all the products that I got back. Then I'm looking at that variable to see if that list of products had anything in it. And if it does, I'm making a call to my Azure function. And the way I was able to do that is I've got my Azure function and my web API behind API management. Make sense? And then the last thing I'll show you is the other thing I can do is I could build a Power App. So if you're in an enterprise that uses Office 365, chances are you probably have Power Apps access too. So I can actually, in my API, if I go back to my API, it's as simple as in my API right here, after I've published it to Azure API Management, I can go right here and I can click Export, and then I'll click Power Apps and Power Automate. And when I do that, I've got access to that API so that I can build little mobile apps that I can distribute to my Power Apps users. And if everything's working, which it might not be, if I click a button here, what that'll do is that'll actually make a call out to that API in my app service and get it all back. And I didn't have to write any code to build this Power App. It's all directly inside of the Power Apps, thing. If I were to go here and actually click edit, pardon me, excuse me, I should back away from the microphone. If I were to go in here and click edit to actually open up that Power App, what you'll see when I single click my button is a formula bar up at the top, like with Excel, like Power Apps do. And it's actually making a call out to that APIM fronted API, which then makes a call to my .NET code. So if I were to click the button right here, you can see this. Clear collect is a method that basically clears a collection, and then it calls the store APIs.getProducts method. If I wanted to do something else in here, I could actually backspace over this, and you can see there's all those API methods that is actually in my web API.
Wow. Okay, that's nice.
Isn't that cool?
Is really cool. Yes. Yeah.
So
wow.
That's been fun. So this, the reason I show you this is we like the idea of, there's a lot of folks out there who, they don't want to become developers, but they have business needs they have to solve, like Hanselman needs his tacos. So, if we run out of stock, we got to get the stuff in, so.
Well, and it's great to be able to kind of scale things to where it's appropriate. Like I love writing code, but I do plenty of automation stuff at work using, logic apps and Power Automate and stuff where it's like, I don't need to maintain an app, or I don't want to pay for and deal with hosting. Like I'm just going to set this thing up and it's going to just work, Right.
And not only that, but when you think about like, if you have 4 or 5 different web APIs out there together that you need to like snap together and do certain things, you could go into your code and you could do all that HTTP client code, or you could do something like this. This seems easier,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Kind of easier to inherit, easier to maintain. There's
handle the recurrence, handle and if it fails, you get like a nice. I don't know if people watching like are using this much, but this fits so naturally into like web services and other APIs and stuff. I use this a ton.
Oh yeah, it's great. So see here, I can pick the store APIs and now ask me which API I want. I can even call a specific version if I wanted to. You know, I could do 1.1. So you can really do a lot of damage there. It's been kind of fun. So
okay, so we're getting towards the end. We have Visual Studio Toolbox Live coming up at 11:30 a.m. Pacific. So in the last kind of couple of minutes here, let's wrap up because we've talked about a lot of stuff.
oh yeah.
So let's what's the takeaway for API developers?
The takeaway for API developers is keep, if you're already an API developer, keep doing what you're doing, period, full stop. The most important thing I would want to leave with you is think about all those cool things we saw at the end, like, being able to like drag and drop stuff together in Logic Apps, being able to like, give an API to a citizen dev and have them build an app that talks to it and, do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. This article is the most important part of that. If those APIs aren't well described, they're not, you can't just walk up to them and look at the OpenAPI and know what you're looking at, and you don't follow certain conventions, none of that other stuff will work. That's key. So I would just say, learn how to properly build and describe your APIs, test these things out. You'll find what works for you, but that's really the main thing is just like, think of your API as a thing, as a source for reuse. If people don't understand it, they can't use it. So.
Okay. So I start by like going through and here, this shows how to create those discoverable APIs. That gives me a nice open API endpoint. Mm-hmm. And then because of that, then I can make use of tooling. I've got this nice open API like view where I can debug and test and document my API. Mm-hmm. I can generate client code. Mm-hmm. And then by publishing it and stuff, I can do all those kind of fancy things that mm-hmm. you showed at the end there too.
Yeah, basically lots and lots of integration possibilities. So integration isn't possible without well described.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we need to wrap up so that the next folks can get all set up. If do stick around if you're watching and you're interested. Visual Studio Toolbox Live Uno platform sounds really cool. And thanks a bunch, Brady. Always amazing to have you on.
It's been great to be here.
Great. Okay.
Is that the show with Leslie and Robert?
It is.
I gotta see that.
It is.
I gotta see that. That's gonna be cool.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. I will switch over to the thanks for watching, and thanks for watching, folks.
Take care, everybody.